right, welcome to the show. This is the Shatter the Script podcast, and this is college football week 12. And I talked last week how we are an exclusive college football show now. At least the show with me is exclusively college football. We're expanding more and more into a network. So with this second episode of the week, of week 12, I'll be predicting the upcoming key matchups in a more centralized format. So that's what today is. It's a prediction show. And if this is your first time listening, thanks so much for joining in. You can find our socials in all of our in our YouTube channel. You can find it at Shatter the Script. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can get there by searching at Shatter the Script as well. And then on TikTok, Instagram, and X, you can search at Shatter the Script, or you can do STS_pod. But all of our socials are in our link tree in each of our bios. So however you find us, there is a link to get all of those squared away. That way you're getting notifications, you see our clips, you see our segments, things like that. But without further ado, I had a fun time doing last week's episode. I know in previous weeks, I kind of recapped the analysis of what happened in the prior, in what happened over that past weekend. You know, you cover the recap analysis, et cetera, et cetera. Last week was more of a forecasting than anything, kind of saying, here's some unique scenarios that could play out in college football. Here's some scenarios that I think are doubtful. ACC, SEC conference championship appearances. What are the most likely scenarios? Things like that. And I think it's good. But not to say I missed anything, but I think now that we're on the back end of the schedule, we've seen so much, and I've talked about what we've seen. Now it needs to be more of a focus of what are we going to see. And so I guess that's where predictions come in. And I'm excited for it because I was kind of playing around with it. I had some spare time this afternoon, and I was going through it, and I was like, okay, well, Vegas makes a line. I know there's a lot of bettors out there. I don't encourage betting. I'm not a like pro degenerate type guy. I'm not going to ever be like, hey, here's the line. This is what you should bet. But I do. People do like to hear it. That way they can gauge, because I'm not going to control your decisions whatsoever. So that's going to be included today. But I had fun with it a little bit, and I kind of put my own STS line in there just to kind of joke around. So don't take it seriously. But let's get into it. So we're going to start off with Friday. So Friday has some important ACC and Big Ten matchups coming into fruition. And honestly, hindsight being 2020, like at the beginning of the year with the preseason AP poll and, you know, just the preseason projections in general, Clemson was supposed to be this top-notch, top-tier, top 10 ranked, whatever you want to call it, program under Dabo Swinney and Cade Klubnik, and it just hasn't happened. It all started to rumble down after the Georgia Tech game early on in the season, and then they lost to Syracuse the next week, and then they lost to Duke the following. It's like, holy crap! It just was like the downfall of Clemson in such a strange fashion. So Clemson is going into Louisville. And so I don't want people to get confused, but if you watch this channel, I want to use my poll. I want to use the STS rankings poll. So when you're hearing rankings, you're not going to be thinking to yourself, what the hell, like the AP poll. I don't go off the AP poll. I go off my poll. I trust my rankings. That is how much I trust my rankings. Clemson at number 18, Louisville. And so Clemson's 4-5, Louisville's 7-2. Vegas has them at -2.5. The STS poll has them at -4.5, favoring Louisville. So both Vegas and STS are favoring Louisville. Game starts at 6:30 p.m. Here's the trouble with this game. And I think the reason the line is so close is, honestly, Vegas is probably looking at Clemson going, well, a lot like Penn State and Indiana. Penn State has a good roster, but they've had a bad season. Same thing with Clemson. Clemson has a pretty good roster, but they've had a bad season. And you can argue with the wall on that, but I think it tends in modern day college football, when something bad tends to happen, it's like playoffs or bust, right? Okay, we lost 3 games already, or we lost to an unranked opponent already. Well, our chances of getting in are going to be super slim now. And that's just not the right thought process But Louisville, though, is coming off of a loss in overtime to California. So you go to a team that is out already. Clemson has practically nothing to play for but pride and maybe just to be a spoiler. And Louisville has everything to lose. And so I think Vegas sees that, and I see that as well, forecasting this game. So I went into it and I said, okay, Miller Moss played at home last week. Didn't play well. Against California isn't a bad program in the ACC by any means, but he didn't play well at home. And that's kind of where your quarterback needs to be playing comfortable. And so I jotted down in my notes that Miller Moss needs to be a lot more rhythmic, much more in rhythm. I think he needs to get the ball out quick because, we don't really understand where Clemson is at in terms of where their strengths are. Like, do they rush the passer well? Have there been pass rushers in the past who have gotten into the NFL and became excellent pass rushers? Do they have a good defensive line history? Like, those things are still, they're still relative at Clemson. So there's a chance that Louisville could be facing some pressure. In terms of the secondary, in terms of making second-level throws, Miller Moss, I just think when you're at home, that should be when your quarterback is most comfortable. He can control the offense, control the tempo. He can move around in the pocket a little bit, extend some plays, but just be comfortable like you had been all year. And I think if that happens, I think if Miller Moss stays comfortable, doesn't try to play outside of himself, doesn't think, okay, I'm 7-2, we got to win this game. That's not how you win a football game. And just kind of removes the factor of being head over heels and plays within himself. I think Louisville comes out with a victory on this one. I've got Louisville winning this game 24-20. And Clemson will move to 4-6, Louisville to 8-2. And that does play this is most definitely a trap game for Louisville. I mean, as we saw last week. So anything could happen, but on a Friday night, kind of a curveball there in the schedule. Just like another game we're going to get into later in the episode, but that's a fun game to tune into on a Friday night because it could turn out to be quite an entertaining matchup. So again, Clemson, nothing to lose. Louisville, everything to lose. Could be a fun one. The next game on the list on Friday night as well is Minnesota at Oregon. Oregon is number 8 on the STS poll. They're sitting at 8-1. Minnesota's at 6-3. Vegas has a line at minus 25.5. Oregon, I've got it minus 20.5. And so the game's at 8 p.m. Another one where, West Coast, playing late at night. These are the games you're like, I wish there was something to watch. There is. So thank God for Friday night college football, Thursday night college football last week, I believe. No, it was Friday night with Memphis and Tulane, which was an entertaining ball game. But here's something to note. Iowa is not renowned for a powerful offense. But earlier in the season, Iowa beat the brakes off of Minnesota 41-3. But I've seen this trend in college football where one team blows the caps off of another. Weeks later, a different team of the same caliber plays that team that got the crap beaten out of them, and the game is just so much closer. Like a recent one was Notre Dame playing Boston College. Notre Dame only beat them like 25-10. The very next week, or if they had a bye, the next opponent Boston College played, it was a blowout. And so you're thinking to yourself, okay, Notre Dame respectably above is a higher caliber than the most recent team that played Boston College. I don't see the correlation there. And that's kind of where the term comes from, any given Saturday, right? And so I had the line at 20.5 on the STS line, but I still think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I don't think Oregon is going to be playing against some unmovable object against Minnesota. I think Oregon's going to do their thing. We saw them play against the Rutgers, who are a decent program this year. They've scored points, I guess, on other Big Ten opponents. So I think Oregon does the same thing that they did to the Rutgers, but Minnesota's a slightly better football team. It is going to score more points. So I think Dante Moore goes out there, throws a couple of dots, maybe 2 or 3 touchdowns. They get the ground game running. They get the pass rush getting after the Minnesota quarterback. There is, I believe it's going to be in the 50s to the 40s at night, maybe some light rain on the forecast that I saw. Nothing that Oregon hasn't seen like 4 or 5 times already this season. So I'm not worried about that too much. And then, of course, I trust Dan Lanning like I did last week against Iowa. So coming off that, just getting battered down by an Iowa team, that's a very physical football game. And, to the credit of the medical guy, a.k.a. my cousin Jacob, who was on the show 2 weeks ago, he was saying, like, look, if you're going to go in there and you're trying to be a team that's like, we got to out physical Iowa to beat them, you can create mistakes. You can create a false identity to which you may lose that game. And so basically he's saying, look, you are a high-flying speed kills football team. Go play like it. And if it doesn't pan out, then at least you played like yourself and you were happy with it. Big shot plays, those types of things. So I see Oregon winning this football game at home, 41-21, defeating Minnesota. And so they'll move on to 9-1. They have a difficult, I think, rest of their two games. I believe they play USC next week, and then they maybe finish off the season with, I think and they already played Oregon State. But they had a pretty tough November from what I remember. I covered it earlier this week, but my brain's kind of fogging right now. So, but Oregon wins that game 42-21. Excuse me, 42-21. Moving on to Saturday, we got College Game Day. Now this is a morning game, strangely enough. So College Game Day is heading to Pittsburgh for number 12 Notre Dame at number 21 Pittsburgh. Both teams are 7-2, and so honestly, I'm going to play this clip because I find it interesting to know. I talked about it yesterday, but I feel like it'd be good for the audience to hear it because this is the opinion I put out there, or the question I posed to the audience last week in week 11, and then in week 12 I brought it to fruition, and then in this episode I want to bring it to light with a clip. So
10-10.
Let's get into this. This is the Pittsburgh coach, Pat Narduzzi, on whether Notre Dame game is a must win. So listen in.
Like this is a must win for this team when it comes to something.
Absolutely not. It is not an ACC game. I'm glad you brought that up. It's not an ACC game. I gladly get beat 103 or 110-10 in that game. They can put 100 up on us as long as we win the next two after that. But again, our focus is on Notre Dame and getting as many wins as we can.
So, like I mentioned, their focus is on winning the ACC championship and appearing in the championship game for their conference. Now, having an outlier in their schedule like Notre Dame is just kind of a tree in the road, right? Just move it over to the side, get past it, and then stay the course to try and get a conference championship and things like that. So, does that mean Pittsburgh's going to go out there and not try? No, it does not mean that. Does that mean Pittsburgh does not want to win this game? No, it does not mean that. Of course, Pittsburgh wants to win this game. They're focused on winning football games. But, I played this into the factor of, well, what does Pittsburgh think about having Notre Dame in week 12 on their schedule when, they're climbing the ranks, and was Pittsburgh supposed to be 7-2? That's a question you guys can ask for yourselves. I believe that they weren't supposed to be 7-2, but I'm happy that they are. It makes college football more entertaining. Do I believe that this is the game that College Game Day should be representing? No, but then at the same time, the last couple of weeks, it was, there are a lot of SEC games that they chose. You Big Ten and AC guys are pissed off that it's not one of your teams, and then all of a sudden it's an ACC game, and the SEC is pissed off that it's not one of their games. So no one's ever going to be happy. That's another thing that I've noticed covering college football. Whether I put BYU in front of Georgia Tech's pissed. Whether I put Georgia Tech in front of BYU, BYU's pissed. It doesn't matter. If I put Notre Dame in the top 10, people are saying Notre Dame shouldn't be top 10, which I haven't done, by the way. So there's no way to make you guys, all of you, happy all at once. So, but into this game, I just wanted to take that opinion and apply it to the matchup. So Vegas has a line at minus 12.5 Notre Dame. I have a line at minus 14 favoring Notre Dame. So I look at this and say, okay, Notre Dame's got a much more inclination to win this football game because they have two losses versus top 10 ranked opponents. They have a loss to A&M, or ranked opponent, I should say. I don't remember what A&M was at the time in week 3. But they lost to A&M and they lost to Miami. Everybody knows that, right? They played poorly against Boston College and they played Navy. Then they beat USC, which is their biggest win. This would be their second biggest win if they won. So this is important for them to be included in the college football playoff selection coming up in December. So I think Notre Dame goes in there and they're going to play a lot harder than Pittsburgh, just naturally. Hearing the Pittsburgh's coach say that, they might not practice as hard. They might not go into the game as hard. I hope that doesn't happen for the quality of football. But, going into Pittsburgh, is that a tough environment? Who knows? Hopefully it will be. But, I have Notre Dame winning this game 35-20. I don't think it's going to be relatively that close. It's not to say that is Notre Dame a better football team than Pittsburgh. I naturally believe that Notre Dame is slightly better than them or handedly better than them. But Pittsburgh, name one player on Pittsburgh. It's like, I don't know. Their quarterback. It's like, okay, well, sure. Anybody else? I was like, I don't know. So, Notre Dame, you can name at least 3 or 4 players. And just on the eye test, running the ball behind Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and CJ Carr, playing pretty solid at quarterback. Granted, the schedule has favored his ability to throw the ball at an elite level, and he did show out pretty decently against Miami and Texas A&M. He's been pretty consistent. People thought he was a replicant of Riley Leonard. Clearly has not been the case. He can throw the football. He's in his youth of age in terms of eligibility, and he has grown throughout the year, a lot like some other quarterbacks, as in like Julian Sayin and players like that. So I think Notre Dame wins this one by 2 possessions, 35-20. And but how is that going to affect Pittsburgh? There's just not much it's going to do. I mean, they're not going to say. I don't think they're even going to say a 2-loss ACC team gets in, but a 3-loss one just on the schedule. I don't see how the Pittsburgh coach doesn't look at that and go, because they play Miami next week. So you got Notre Dame, then Miami, then you get another game to finish off the season, and you got to win them to be considered to be in the college football playoff in a conference that hasn't been looking all too strong. So that's the 11 o'clock, the morning window. Jumping to the afternoon window, I'm skipping over the Texas A&M South Carolina game. Unless you guys are just like begging for me to cover it, then I can do like a short little clip covering that myself. Just reply in the comment, hey, please do the Texas A&M game. But I didn't think it was a key matchup. I mean, in terms of A&M's schedule, yes, it is a key matchup. But I wanted to go to find these ranked games and the ones that everybody's going to be focusing their attention on. So the 2:30 window here is the SEC game, I believe, of the week, right outside of the Texas and Georgia one at night. But number 10, Oklahoma 7-2 at number 4, Alabama 8-1. Vegas has a line at -5.5 Bama. I've got the line at -3.5 Bama. So here's the thing. Oklahoma has played on the road in some pretty critical games. I think they went on the road against Tennessee. They went on the road against Texas, and then technically it was a neutral site, and then they had another game early in the season that was away. I believe it was like Temple or something. And I think I'm missing a game in there as well. But obviously they're a much better team at home, like any college football team naturally would be in most cases that have a winning record. I look at John Mateer. I look at their offense. They got 2 running backs that are out on injury. Credit to somebody that pointed it out in the TikTok comments. We were trying to have this honest evaluation of Oklahoma, kind of saying, the medical guy was saying they're very just a very boring offense. Are they boringly good? Their defense is really good, but their offense is just not productive enough to really open some eyes. But they do find ways to win football games, and I pair that with their strength of schedule, saying that Oklahoma is playing their asses off right now, and whether they finish 9-3 or 10-2 or really 8-4, that's an incredible season based off of their schedule. I mean, after this game, they got to go play Missouri and they got to play LSU. Luckily, both those games are at home. But you look at it; they've played already. Tennessee, Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama this week. They played Michigan early in the year. That's a brutal schedule. But they've handled it well. I mean, they're sitting at 7-2, and I know that Texas beat them in the Red River rivalry, but Oklahoma has shown nothing but the signs that they can win football games. And it's really, really tough to do what they have done week after week, playing a prominent opponent. So going into Tuscaloosa, Alabama, with the hottest team arguably in the SEC, behind the Heisman favorite Ty Simpson, who's making Sunday throws on a consistent basis. I look at Kalen DeBoer versus Brett Venables, and I see this with Alabama. Alabama's average differential score at home versus SEC teams is plus 14.5 points. So at home, they win by 14 or more, by 2 possessions. A notable game to recollect on that would be, they played LSU, they beat them by 11. They played Tennessee at home, they beat them by 17 in dominating fashion. So with that being said, compare Oklahoma on the road to Alabama's performance at home versus SEC opponents. This isn't just all around. I'm not including, their blowout victories after Florida State. I'm not including those. Just the SEC home games, what that differential is. And that's pretty eye-opening to win by 2 possessions versus SEC opponents, because those conference opponents were very good teams, very good programs. They were ranked in most cases. So at the same time, Oklahoma needs this game bad. They do. They've needed every game pretty bad. They have to go in there and they have to, again, fight their asses off. And they have to lean on John Mateer. And these other young guys and these running backs are going to have to find a way to make explosive plays, to step up. The offensive line is going to have to give them an extra second, 70% of the snaps. And hopefully John Mateer makes those plays. And so with that being said, Oklahoma's defense, top 3, top 5 in the nation, whatever they're categorized at now, I believe that they're a top 3 defense in the country. That's going to give Ty Simpson maybe some troubles in this game. If you're able to blitz and play press man, and you're able to put a wrap on Ryan Williams, a lot of good things can happen for your offense. Especially, you win the turnover award, that's usually a 14-point swing. In the college football level, it's probably a 10-point swing. In the NFL level, it's a 7-point swing. So with that being said, I do still have Alabama winning this football game. I have them winning 27-22. And a lot like what we saw against Tennessee, Oklahoma wasn't able to finish a lot of drives. They were able to accumulate a lot of field goals. Their kicker did a phenomenal, I know he was wearing the short shorts, but he did a phenomenal job on the road kicking those field goals. And so if he can replicate that, that's kind of where I generate the 22 points from. I could see Oklahoma scoring 3 or 4 field goals and then maybe having to go for 2 at a certain point to get them within 3 points, and maybe that fails, and then that's kind of where the game stalls and ends at 27-22. But nonetheless, I am still confident in Alabama to win this football game. But as I talked about in the episode earlier this week, there is a low probability that if Oklahoma can win out, be 10-2, and be included in the college football playoffs, with Alabama still in the SEC championship game, because they got the tiebreaker over Georgia. So we'll get into that SEC game here in a second. Back to the Big Ten in the 2:30 game. Iowa 6-3 visits number 15 USC 7-2. So Iowa 6-3 at number 15 USC 7-2. Vegas has a line at -7. My line is -7.5. I just kind of tweaked it just a little bit. But I say this. Iowa plays close. We know this, right? We know that they play tough. We know that they play, what do you call it? In a line with the weather, right? Where the weather kind of helps them, gives them an advantage at home, especially later on in the year. Well, in this certain case, they're going on the road to play a ranked opponent. So they're going to California. So long distance travel, Iowa, all the way to California, to Southern California, and going to play Lincoln Riley's offense. And, Jada Maeva is 24 total touchdowns and 6 interceptions on the year. And, I took a note on here and said, watch out for King Miller at running back for USC. His last 3 or 4 games have been really great production-wise. He's really starting to hit his stride. He's a younger running back, so fresh legs. And so if they can get the ground game running and, in NFL terms, use the run to set up the pass and create some explosive plays. And I think Maeva is going to have a pretty solid day. I think just saying that Iowa plays so well against ranked teams, or so tough, better put, against ranked teams at home, for them to go on the road against a ranked team, I don't think they have the firepower offensively to keep up with USC. You could argue that USC's defense isn't solid enough to stop Iowa's offense, but at the same time, a bad offense doesn't cancel a decent defense. It really doesn't. So if Iowa's going to win this game, they're going to have to generate a lot of turnovers. They have to control the pace of the game, keep the ball away from USC and minimize their possessions. But I have USC winning this football game 28-17 at home and advancing to 8-2 on the year. And I think Michigan and USC are going to be right on the cusp of playing in the conference championship. And, somebody pointed out in the comments earlier this week that, Michigan still does have a chance. And I missed this. I hand up. I'm man enough to say if I missed something or not. I did miss this. They're 7-2, but one loss came to an out-of-conference opponent, and it was a relatively close game. It was on the road against Oklahoma. So they're still in contention to play for the Big Ten championship if they upset Ohio State in Week 14, which they have done the previous 4 years. So on paper, it looks like a good chance that Michigan could possibly usurp Ohio State, or USC could sneak in there and usurp both of them. Or not both of them, could usurp their way into the college football playoff itself. So that's something to watch. Although USC does play Oregon after they play Iowa. So that'll be a tough November for both USC and Oregon. But nonetheless, I have USC winning 28-17 at home versus Iowa. All right. The night games. Now, here's where it gets really tasty. Number 10, Texas, 7-2. At number 5, Georgia, 8-1. So Vegas has a line at -6. I have the line at -2.5, both favoring Georgia. And yes, I have a 4-point differential with Vegas. I do have Georgia favored within a field goal. This game's at 6:30, and I looked at this, and Texas is such a conundrum, right? And the way I have it phrased is at the beginning, I talked about this a little bit before, but at the beginning of the year, we watched Ohio State and Texas, and people were like, oh, they lost. The number one AP ranked team loses on the road to Ohio State under Matt Patricia's defense. Arch Manning looked like crap. You could tell from the first throw that his mechanics were off. You could tell from the rest of the game that he wasn't what was promised. And then they played like 3 or 4 FCS out of conference games and just kind of got to get their get back, it's essentially get their warm up. And still within those games, the offense was not as productive. They were still pretty lethargic. And I've used that word a lot to describe, slow tempo type offenses, the ones that are not really stretching the field. They're very methodical driven. And if you watch with the eye test, with Texas, I talked about earlier this week that they kind of play not to lose in terms of coordinating the offense. And people are like, oh, Sark needs to give up the play calling. And I'm like, no, that's not something that needs to happen. What is happening currently is, Sark's in practice every week watching Arch Manning. And I'd love to know the percentage of screen plays that they run. Bubbles, smokes, jailbreaks, running back, tight end screens, those types of things. They're all over the place in every matchup. And some of them hit, if you get good blocking on the perimeter, if you get at the right defensive matchup and call the right check of the line, and if that's something that happens, some of them hit, like we saw against Vanderbilt. But as I was saying, early in the year, offense very methodical, very lethargic, very slow. Defense played great, though, outside of the Florida game. Fast forward to the back half of the season, the offense all of a sudden starts to click. And that was after the Kentucky game. Kentucky offense looked the worst they've looked all year. In the Oklahoma game, offense did not look good at all. They did not. They took advantage of the turnovers that their defense forced. So we have very little data where the Texas offense really exploded, and that was Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. And it took them 3 quarters, essentially, for Texas to really kickstart their offense against Mississippi State, who has a terrible defense. So, and, they went in overtime. I think they have 2 overtime wins versus SEC teams this year, if the Mississippi State one was an OT. And so, and so furthermore, I look at that and I say, look, Texas is such a conundrum to where we don't really know what we're going to see from this team. Was this? Yeah, it was in overtime. I just wanted to double check if I was right. Texas did win versus Mississippi State in overtime. I was like 99% sure, but I don't like being wrong. And so going into Georgia, that's another thing with Texas. On the road, they haven't been as impressive as they've been at home. They're a completely different team at home than they are on the road. They have not played a team on the road that has been in the conference. I'm not talking about Ohio State. In the conference, it has been as good as Georgia. And so, again, slim data, very slim data. And so here's the tricky part that no one's going to predict, and it would be such a high risk, high reward if this isn't a knowing thing, but if you guessed it, you'd look like the biggest genius in the world. And that is, if Texas were to put the defense that they played with at the beginning of the year and matched it with the offense that they've played against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt, they would win this football game versus Georgia. That is a high-risk, high-reward take. I'm not going to be bold enough to say that happens. I'm fine with saying that Georgia wins and then Texas surprises me, because then that creates so much more momentum for Texas heading into that rivalry game at the end of the year, right after Thanksgiving, versus Texas A&M at home, to which they are a much better team, like I mentioned before, at home. So Texas could really shock the world here and showcase that they belong inside the top 10 or within the college football playoff discussion. And like I mentioned with Oklahoma, it's the same for Texas, where if they win versus Texas or versus Georgia this week, they have a swift chance, a pretty good chance at going 10-2. Those A&M games, forget the rankings, forget all of it. It's a rivalry game, and Texas typically has the number on A&M in football. And so if you want to make that take, if you want to be that risky, that bold, then sure. Go for it, man. I mean, I'm all about it. Me personally, I have Georgia winning this game 28-23. I think Texas plays them well, and from what we know from the committee is, especially with big time national brands, an example would be an independent school like Notre Dame. But what we've learned is the margin of victory doesn't really affect you all that much. They don't really look at that and go, eh. They kind of say, man, what an impressive way to come out of a dangerous scenario. And so I think Georgia on the flip side is Georgia has been in a lot of dangerous scenarios like that. They've been behind in the fourth quarter in a shootout or in a high scoring, or not in a shootout, in a shootout and in a high scoring game. Both of those, sorry. They've been behind in those games in a comfortable spot, and then they end up converting it into a W. And so the resilience of Georgia, which I have talked about before, and the durability for 4 quarters is what I think has separated Georgia from being a 9-3, 8-4 team this year. Is that going to be sustainable? No, but at the same time, as the season goes on, you learn to prevent those things from happening again. So, at home versus Texas, the advantage Texas has, you don't know what team is coming. The advantage Georgia has, you know what kind of team that you are. So with that being said, can Texas create chaos by putting together both a powerful offense that they've shown against Vanderbilt and Mississippi and match it with the first 7 or 8 weeks, give or take, excluding the Florida game, with a powerful, unstoppable defense that they have relatively shown this season. If they can put those two together, their special teams has been great all year long. Let's say that. They can put all 3 of those together. Texas goes in and wins this game versus Georgia. Mark my words. That is not my prediction. Like I mentioned, Georgia wins this football game 28-23, barring those things for Texas. But I'm excited, man. I think this is the biggest game to watch in terms of playoff implications. For sure. Tenfold. Because if Texas wins, it could shape up to be a pretty interesting selection process in December. All right, the final game of the Saturday slate that I'm going to choose. And, I think the only reason I'm choosing this one is because it is late at night. Nobody's going to really, unless you're just like a true blood fan, no one's going to be watching this. You're either going to be out with the boys or you're going to be, turning on the Xbox or checking out a movie with a wife and taking care of the kids, going to bed because you got church in the morning. But at 9 o'clock, 9:15, TCU at 6-3 goes into BYU, number 14 on my STS poll. BYU's 8-1. Vegas has BYU as a favorite as 4.5. I have the favorite as BYU 7.5. And so, again, this is one of those games closer to the West Coast in Utah that not a lot of people are going to be watching other than BYU fans, but TCU is a high-scoring football team. And they were 6-2 prior to this week. And I think they can be a dangerous team. They've got one of the best Big 12 quarterbacks within their conference. He is a stat patter. He is a gunslinger. He stretches the field. So that can be a dangerous thing for BYU. So I think it snips him in the butt earlier in the first, like in that first half. I think it's going to be, oh my gosh, okay, got to lock in. TCU is stretching the field on us. They're getting explosive plays. They're converting field goals into touchdowns. They're going for it on 4th down because they have nothing to lose. They're running high tempo. Their quarterback's moving the ball, this, that, and the other. That first half kind of shocks them, and they're like, holy, we got to get our stuff together. And then in the second half, BYU and their freshman Bear, number 47, gets it into action, and they pull away with the victory. But I think it's going to be a shootout. I think it's going to be I got BYU winning this game 41-33. And I like that prediction because it shows what TCU has done historically this year, but it hasn't shown what BYU necessarily has done historically this year against, above 5, like plus 500 opponents within their conference. Like they were close with Arizona. They were close with Utah. They held Texas to a sub 30 points, but they didn't score any. And so those 3 teams, you're like, okay, none of those teams scored more than 30. Neither did BYU, but maybe this is the one where it's like, holy crap, like this is a shootout. BYU's offense had to kick it into high gear. And that may be because TCU is in a rush to score, and that gives BYU plenty of opportunities to, plenty of possessions to capitalize and score. But, we'll see how it goes. But not necessarily the most key matchup of the week, but it's one that me personally, I enjoy sitting there at 9:15 if I have nothing to do and locking into that game and watching it. So the more college football, the better. So, but anyway, all things considered, I think this is going to be a really entertaining college football week. I hope you guys enjoy the weekend. I had a fun time doing this predictions. If you are a first-time listener and you made it to the end of the episode, please subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing. I don't ask for anything. Over time, it's only going to get better. We're a very young, independent channel, so we don't have a bought or paid for agenda. I'm not trying to be different in any way with my takes. I really want to give my honest opinion and be authentic with it. And you hear that term a lot with newcomers in the podcast world. Want to be authentic, but anybody from the ages of 15 to 40, I think would listen to this content and say, maybe he knows something, because the predictions have really came into fruition over the past 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm kind of nervous about this one because this is the most games I've predicted in an episode. I've usually kept it to 2 or 3, and there have been key matchups, and I'm not like hand picking, but I'm picking the ranked matchups, and I've been right. So this is a very difficult week to project. So that's a little disclaimer. And if I'm wrong, then I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable because all the more reason to watch college football, because any given Saturday, these things could change. The world can be shocked. So chaos, as we call it. So I'm excited. Thanks you guys for tuning in. Catch our next episode next week on Tuesdays. I'll try and incorporate a Thursday prediction show every week, usually 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll get this thing under wraps. But you guys have a good rest of your weekend. Enjoy the games, and Giga Maggies.